October 31st, 1803. The USS Philadelphia unexpectedly runs aground in Tripoli harbor during an attempted blockade of enemy pirates. Forced to surrender to Tripolitan gunboats, Captain William Bainbridge is enslaved along with his 300-man crew. Pasha Yusuf Karamanli of Tripoli sets the initial ransom at $1,690,000, an amount exceeding the entire military budget of the United States. 3.5 months later, a sailboat waving the British flag slips into Tripoli harbor under cover of darkness. Upon its approach, Tripolitans call out, demanding that the sailboat keep its distance. An Arabic-speaking Sicilian man replies for the sailors aboard the incoming vessel, who are dressed in the manner of Maltese merchants. They've lost their anchors, he says, and request permission to moor in the harbor for the night. The weather has indeed been rough. The Tripolitans grant the boat permission to tie up alongside the Philadelphia. Unbeknownst to them, however, the boat they have allowed into their harbor is in fact the USS Intrepid. Aboard it, Lieutenant Stephen Decatur and a crew of 70 Americans lie in wait, most below deck. Their objective? To board and destroy the Philadelphia before the 36-gun warship can be put into service by the pirates. It is a daring mission, bordering on foolish. Now deep in the harbor, they are in range of the city castle's heavy batteries. As the Intrepid nears the Philadelphia, a keen Tripolitan sees something amiss. "Americans!" he cries in Arabic. Calmly, the Sicilian interpreter insists that only Englishmen and Maltese are aboard their boat. This time, however, the Tripolitans are not fooled. "Americans!" comes the cry again. Unfortunately for them, the two vessels are now directly alongside each other. Lieutenant Decatur grabs the main chains of the Philadelphia and orders his men to board. A moment later, the flank of the frigate is swarming with Americans. Raiders from North Africa had been harassing merchants in the Mediterranean and Eastern Atlantic since the 16th century. By the time of American independence, they'd acquired a notorious reputation. Known as Barbary pirates or corsairs, they were officially privateers in the service of the Barbary states of North Africa, Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli. The two great naval powers of the time, Britain and France, paid annual tributes in exchange for safe passage for their ships. Thus, while America remained a British colony, it enjoyed protection. As soon as American ships began flying the stars and stripes, however, they became liable to capture and enslavement. Britain, of course, was only too happy to remind the pirates of this. The United States signed a peace treaty with Morocco in 1786, now the longest-standing treaty in American history. The three remaining Barbary powers were not so obliging. In 1785, pirates from Algiers captured 2 American ships and enslaved their crews. 8 years later, Algerine pirates captured 11 more ships and enslaved 105 more sailors. In 1794, Congress voted to purchase peace with Algiers and ransom the enslaved sailors for a whopping $1 million. Notably, it approved an additional $1 million for the building of 6 war frigates and the pay and provision of their crews. By the time Thomas Jefferson moved into the president's house in 1801, the United States had signed treaties with all 4 of the Barbary states at a total cost of $1.25 million, or over 20% of its annual budget. Alas, in pirate diplomacy, treaties are really only a starting point from which to demand more money. The Pasha of Tripoli, Yusuf Karamanli, did just that, citing late payments. Jefferson had long disapproved of the treaties ratified by the Federalist-led Congress. In his eyes, the Barbary powers were backward states, incapable of honoring said treaties, and would continue to demand tribute indefinitely unless checked by military force. Now President, Jefferson refused to meet the Pasha's new demands. In May of 1801, Karamanli sent soldiers to cut the flagstaff at the U.S. consulate in Tripoli, effectively declaring war on the United States. Before word of the Pasha's actions arrived in America, Jefferson sent Commodore Richard Dale to the Mediterranean with a squadron of 3 frigates and a war schooner to escort American ships in the area and try for peace. When Dale arrived in Gibraltar, however, he quickly recognized that Tripoli was again a hostile nation, and he moved to establish a blockade of Tripoli harbor. On August 1st, the USS Enterprise, on its way to Malta to fetch water for the sailors in the blockade, encountered a 14-gun Tripolitan corsair, the Tripoli. The Enterprise, a war schooner, had been flying the British flag. Thus, when hailed, the Tripolitan captain replied that his ship had come, quote, to cruise after the Americans. In response, the Enterprise raised its true colors and opened fire. The pirates, realizing that they could not achieve victory in a gunfight, maneuvered their ship alongside the Enterprise in order to board it and put the fight to the sword. They were turned back by the muskets of American Marines. In the end, the Enterprise pounded the Tripoli into surrender and threw its guns overboard. Yet, it could do no more. Jefferson remained a strict interpreter of the Constitution and did not believe he had a right to engage in war without congressional approval. The Tripoli was released. While Congress never officially declared war on Tripoli, in February of 1802 it gave Jefferson the authority to use whatever means necessary to defeat the Tripolitan corsairs. In spring of that year, he put Commodore Richard Valentine Morris at the head of a fleet of 5 frigates and the Enterprise. By all accounts, Morris was inexcusably slow to action, and he did not arrive at the Barbary coast until February of the next year. When word of his inactivity reached Jefferson, Morris was relieved of duty and forced to face a court of inquiry, which determined that he, quote, did not conduct himself in his command of the Mediterranean squadron with the diligence or activity necessary. Meanwhile, the blockade had been largely ineffective, due in part to uncharted rocks and reefs in Tripoli's shallow coastal waters. It was one of these reefs that left the USS Philadelphia stranded after chasing a Tripolitan blockade runner, as documented in our opening. Prior to capture, the Philadelphia's captain, William Bainbridge, had the good sense to throw the ship's weaponry overboard. Much of it, however, was recovered by Tripolitan divers, while the Philadelphia itself was released from the reef in a gale and subsequently brought to port. The situation was fraught with danger for the Americans. Once restored, the Philadelphia would become the most powerful warship in the entire Tripolitan fleet. So it was that the great British naval commander Horatio Nelson called Stephen Decatur's nighttime mission to destroy the captured frigate, quote, the most bold and daring act of the age. Of the 30-some Tripolitans aboard the Philadelphia at the time of Decatur's surprise attack, only about a dozen escaped. The rest were cut down by swords and knives. Mere minutes after the American boarding, the Philadelphia was aflame in the harbor. The Intrepid took fire in its sails as it made its retreat, but escaped without the loss of a single American life. Morris's replacement, Commodore Edward Preble, would follow Decatur's successful mission with further bombardments and attacks of the harbor. Yet neither he nor the Tripolitans achieved a decisive victory. Meanwhile, news of the loss of the Philadelphia alarmed the players in Washington. Jefferson thus resolved to send an even larger squadron to the Mediterranean under Commodore Samuel Barron. Moreover, an ex-army captain and former consul to Tunis, William Eaton, received permission to form an alliance with the Pasha of Tripoli's exiled older brother Hamid, who was, conveniently, looking to get his throne back. In February of 1805, Hamid Karamanli was hiding from his brother's assassins near Cairo, Egypt. There, he and Eaton re-established the terms of a deal they had previously discussed. The Americans would provide funds and supplies in exchange for the release of American prisoners once Hamid returned to power. The pair quickly assembled a force of 400 men, including 8 American Marines and 90 Tripolitans under Hamid, along with Greek and Arab mercenaries. Despite numerous near mutinies and cultural conflicts, by April 27th, the motley force had marched 500 miles across the Sahara Desert to Dern, a strategic port east of Tripoli held by the Pasha. Along the way, their numbers had been reinforced by hundreds of Bedouin mercenaries. At Dern, Eaton and Hamid joined 3 American ships led by Captain Isaac Hull in a 3-pronged attack. As Hull's ships bombarded the city by sea, the Americans and Greek mercenaries, with one field artillery piece, first fired and then charged from the east. Meanwhile, Hamid and the Arab mercenaries, now some 700 strong, marched around the south of the city and attacked along a ravine from the southwest. Remarkably, in little more than an hour, the Allied force of fewer than 1,000 overwhelmed a defense estimated at 4 times its strength. For the first time ever, Americans raised the Stars and Stripes after a military action on foreign soil. Unfortunately for Hamid, Tobias Lear, Jefferson's consul general for the Barbary coast, took advantage of the victory to sign a treaty with Tripoli. The Pasha, alarmed by the loss of Dern and the ever-increasing presence of American warships in the Mediterranean, agreed to end hostilities and free the American prisoners for $60,000 ransom. It was, at the very least, a poorly timed treaty by Lear. As a result, Hamid Karamanli would never reclaim his throne, though Yusuf was persuaded to free Hamid's wife and children. Ultimately, however, all this was prelude to America's larger conflict with Britain, who had been using the Barbary pirates to maintain its naval supremacy. This conflict shortly blew up in the War of 1812, whereupon the pirates, at the urging of the British, resumed terrorizing American ships. Finally, in 1815, after the conclusion of the War of 1812, President James Madison turned his attention back to the Barbary coast. The US Navy had naturally greatly expanded during its war with Britain. In May, now Commodore Stephen Decatur sailed for Algiers with the USS Guerriere and 9 additional warships, while an even larger force under Commodore William Bainbridge followed close behind. The Second Barbary War lasted a total of 3 days, during which time Decatur's force quickly captured 2 ships and took hundreds of prisoners. The terms of the treaty he secured were definitive. No further tributes, all prisoners released, full shipping rights. Oh yeah, and $10,000 restitution for the Americans. If you enjoyed this episode, do us a favor, like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Until next time, this is Bigfoot saying so long, and save me a seat at your next campfire.